Hi there. Since last time I talked about the philosophy of Shahid Bazi or gazing at um, male beauty in my previous video, for this one, I want to talk about examples in Attar's works about the philosophy using the stories about Sultan Mahmud and Malik Ayaz. So in Attar's works, we encounter a set of narratives that connects the love and contemplation of the beauty of adolescent boys with the contemplation of divine beauty and love. This kind of love in Attar's works frequently occurs between a roaming dervish and an adolescent boy, which is the common practice and acknowledged part of the philosophy of gazing at male beauty. However, oftentimes we find Attar deviating from the philosophy and breaking some of the rules and codes in the philosophy of Shahid Bazi. So some of those narratives include the poems about Sultan Mahmud of Ghazni um, and his servant Malik Ayaz. Um, Sultan Mahmud of Ghazni was the most important ruler of the Ghaznavid Empire, and he turned the small city of Ghazni, which is in today's Afghanistan, into the wealthy capital of his empire, which extended from present-day Afghanistan to Iran, Pakistan, and to the northwest of India. Malik Ayaz was a Turkic servant who became an officer and then a general in the army of Sultan Mahmud, and later rose to the rank of a king of Lahore in 1021. And this was because of his devotion to Sultan Mahmud. Now, Attar's depiction of Sultan Mahmud's relationship with Ayaz is noteworthy because it is one of the moments and occasions in Attar's works where he breaks away from the codes of the philosophy, as I mentioned. Now, reading the narratives of Mahmud and Ayaz's relationship, it is difficult to assume that their love was the kind of love practiced by Sufis in their brotherhoods and confraternity circles, the kind of mystical love of God and contemplation of divine beauty through the beauty of adolescent boys. Shahid Bazi, of course, was commonly practiced in this period in confraternity communities, particularly during mystical initiations, and was expected to exist and practice merely for the love of God. As I mentioned in my previous video as well, that was the ideal. Now, the practice was a whole different story. However, the narratives about Sultan Mahmud's relationship with Ayaz did not take place in such Sufi circles or mystical context, and it was not pursued for the sake of the love of God. So, um, because Sultan Mahmud and Malik Ayaz also have this master-slave relationship, it is important to note that such homoerotic relationships between masters and slaves in medieval Iran were also common. However, the purpose of such relationships was not again the spiritual type or the mystical kind of love. It was just for the sake of sexual pleasure. In addition, from the stories, we can infer that Ayaz is not an adolescent boy, but rather an adult man. Therefore, it seems obvious that the relationship between Mahmud and Ayaz deviated from the standards of the philosophy. And while this homoerotic love affair does not conform to the ideals of Sufi practice and Sufi philosophy, Attar portrays the relationship as both spiritual and earthly. In many of his narratives, Attar depicts the Sultan publicly expressing his love for Ayaz. One of these narratives appears in Musibat Nama and is titled The Beggar Who Fell in Love with Ayaz. Now, in this story, Attar relates that Sultan Mahmud orders a beggar who fell in love with Ayaz to forget him and go away because Ayaz is only for Sultan Mahmud to love. The beggar replies to the Sultan that if he claims Ayaz to be his, then he is not a true lover because love, selfishness, and possessiveness contradict each other. The beggar claims to love Ayaz sincerely because he has already annihilated his nafs, his self, the lower self, through the love that he has for Ayaz. He expresses that although the Sultan may forbid him to see Ayaz, he cannot make the love he feels for Ayaz to disappear from his heart. This narrative is a comment on the sincere love that necessitates selflessness, which is required in breaking of the nafs and the ego or the lower self, also for divine love. The lover needs to lose their self in order to merge with the beloved. The story reveals that a lover never stops loving the beloved, even though external forces, such as, for example, the Sultan, threaten him. By placing the Sultan and the beggar alongside one another in this story as rivals, Attar invokes class as a category of desire, especially since it's being violated and transcended. Furthermore, Attar portrays the love between a human being and the divine as the apotheosis of love that crosses class and gender boundaries. Now, this violation of the gender and class boundaries also appears in many of Attar's poems and in the context of Mahmud and Ayaz's relationship many times as well. And there is, for example, let's look at this excerpt from Elahiname. And I'll read the poem and the translation and then talk about that. So Attar in Elahiname writes, به خدمت هر دم افسون بود رأیش که می مالید و می بوسید پایش ایاز سیمبر را گفت محمود تو را زین پای بوسیدن چه مقصود ز 7 اعضا چرا بر پا دهی بوس دگر اعضا رها کرده به افسوس چو قدر روی میبینی که چون است چرا میلت به پای سرنگون است ایازش گفت که این کاری عجیب است که خلقی را ز روی تو نصیب است که میبینند رویت جمله چون ماه نمی یابد به پای تو کسی راه چو اینجا نیست غیری این بالخلاص بسی نزدیکترین بایدم خاص. The translation. Every moment he increased his devotion to his master, for as he rubbed his feet, he kissed them also. Said Mahmud to the silver-breasted Ayaz, what is the purpose of thy kissing my feet? Of all the 7 members, why shouldest thou kiss the feet? Thou hast, alas, neglected the other members. When thou seest the value of the face, why dost thou prefer the humble feet? Ayaz replied, it's a strange matter. All mankind have their share of thy face, for they all see thy moon-like countenance. But none has access to thy feet. Since here there is no one other than we, our intimacy is greater, and this I must have for my own. So to Ayaz, the adoration of the Sultan's feet represents the highest degree of intimacy. Ayaz explains that kissing the Sultan's feet is an act of deep intimacy, for he can have access to what is inaccessible to others. Now, this conversation, of course, depicts the desire for intimacy and privacy between them. However, there is a spiritual context as well. And in that context, through this story, Attar is suggesting that the seeker or the Sufi wayfarer desires to see what is veiled. And by what is veiled, we mean the ultimate beloved, the divine. This veil is the veil of imperfection, that of God's creations. God, as the most perfect one, is pitted against his imperfect creations. Now, to reach the divine, the imperfect human should transcend this veil. And this in itself creates otherness. And if human desire to view the Creator unveiled, they have to transcend the earthly constructed paradigms. Moreover, this desire to see the divine unveiled is the reason for the Sufis' transcendence. The Sufi wants to be intimate with the divine in a way that no ordinary person can be. They long for intimacy that cannot be disrupted by earthly matters. In order to behold the divine unveiled, the Sufi has to move beyond the ordinary, annihilate the nafs, and become united with the divine. This narrative also hints at the desire of the lover to be humbled in front of the beloved. And this is another instance demonstrating how love enables a lover to violate class boundaries and hierarchies. Attar reveals how, for the sake of the unattainable love for the other, a lover violates socially constructed boundaries, which consequently results in his encounter with a world of possibilities. This desire to behold the beloved unveiled is illustrated in, as I mentioned, many of Attar's poems, as well as in this narrative in Elahinameh, where upon hearing that Ayaz has gone to the bath alone, Mahmud rushes there with a sullen heart. And this is how Attar describes it. بدید القصه روی آن پریوش و از دیوار گرمابه در آتش ز عکس صورتش دیوار حمام همه رقاص گشته از در و بام. He beheld the face of that peri-like one, which had set the walls of the bath in flames. From the reflection of his face, the walls, with the door and the roof, were all set a-dancing. Now, the setting of this story in the bath and the imagery of the walls all in flames adds strong sensuality to the narrative. The flame serves, however, as a metaphor not only for passion that Ayaz's beauty has set in the Sultan's heart, but it is also the passion in spiritual context for the divine beloved. The lover here wants to behold the beloved in his entirety rather than just an arm or a leg. Now, gazing upon the lover's face ignites the Sultan's heart, and the Sultan cannot be content with just a part or a limb of the beloved. He wants to behold his beloved in his entirety. When the Sultan sees his beloved's beauty in its entirety, he gives up his entire soul to every member of Ayaz's body. This manifestation of surrender and humility or humbleness by the Sultan serves as a reference to the power of love to transform the Sultan into a slave of his own slave because of love. So the Attar blurs the lines between the master-slave relationship here and by turning the sultan into a subordinate servant of his own slave. The reference to burning and flaming heart in the extract that we had, as I mentioned, also signifies the fire of passion, not only in earthly context, but in mystical context as well, because the Sufi, after longing for the divine, also feels the same passion for the divine to be unveiled so that the Sufi can be in reunion with the divine. This also indicates that being the slave of the beloved is the highest status a human being can attain. Now, the narrative continues with Ayaz questioning the Sultan's rapture, basically. شهش گفتا چو رویت در نظر بود ز یک بند تو دل بی خبر بود کنون چون دیده آمد بندت شدم چون بندت مستمندت مرا از عشق رویت جان همی سوخت کنون صد آتش دیگر برافروخت چو یک بندت آمد دل نوازم کنون من با کدامین عشق بازم. The king replied, when I saw only thy face, my heart had no conception of each separate member. Now that all my limbs have become visible to me, I am the slave of each of them as they are of thee. My heart was burning for love of thy face. Now 100 more fires have flared up. Since my heart is ravished by each and all of your members, to which shall I now give my love? So Mahmud, the lover, needs to see and enjoy his beloved in full. The theme of beholding the beloved in full as no one else can is invoked here again as a reference to a Sufi desire to see the divine unveiled. Ayaz reciprocates the Sultan's desire, which contradicts the principles of the philosophy of Shahid Bazi, where the beloved is supposed to remain coy. The story shows the strong love and intimacy between the lover and the beloved who lose themselves in each other. Now, considering the previous narrative about Ayaz wanting to see Sultan Mahmud in his entirety, in full, or having access to the one part which is unattainable to others, alongside this one where Mahmud wants to have the entirety of the beloved, we see that both Mahmud and Ayaz want to have a full relationship with the beloved where no one else can have. In that sense, it is not clear who's the lover, who's the beloved, and who's the passive partner and who's the active partner in this relationship. It seems that there is no sense of conformity to the standard rules of the philosophy here. Not only the gender boundaries are being crossed, but also the dominant master-subordinate slave relationship is reversed. Now, Attar seems to be suggesting that in spiritual context, these demarcations are just worldly matters and lose their meaning in spirituality. All that matters is the love between the lover and the beloved. And through this, otherness is diminished. The limit has been superseded in order for the nafs, for the self, and the other to merge and transgress the law, as Michel Foucault would say. In addition to queering malehood, here Attar also introduces the possibility for new kinds of love and sexuality to arise and thrive. Through this narrative, Attar shows that boundaries exist in order for us to enjoy crossing them and experience what Jacques Lacan calls jouissance. Since we can never be limitless except in our minds and hearts, boundaries help us to imagine what is impossible as what is prohibited. Attar's writing, however, provides us with the opportunity to imagine the impossible and transgress the boundaries. Attar encourages human beings to be free from shackles of reason and filled with love so that they may be able to subvert the worldly paradigms. In Elohinameh, Mahmud asks Ayaz to tell him who in the world has the greatest kingdom and is the greatest of kings. Ayaz responds that his kingdom is greater than the Sultan's because although the Sultan, is a king with all this kingdom, he has lost his heart, the essence of humanity or humanness, to Ayaz. Therefore, Ayaz is the king, and because he has control over the Sultan's heart, his kingdom is greater. Ayaz claims that for this reason, even the heavens envy him. Attar ends this poem, this narrative, with a comment on the significance of the human heart, which he describes as the empire of love. چو اصل تو دل است و دل نداری بگو تا مملکت را بر چه کاری Since the essence of thee is thy heart and thou hast no heart, of what use is thy empire? This story reveals that the love of this beautiful man annuls all rules, reversing the master-slave power relationship. Attar uses the heart in this story as a literary metaphor for the Sultan's kingdom and, by extension, the divine kingdom. Whereas the Sultan offers his kingdom to Ayaz willingly, Ayaz refuses to accept it because he has better kingdom, which is the Sultan's heart. As Helmut Rieder writes in Mahmud and Ayaz's narratives, and I'm quoting, it is from the beloved slave that love's rules are to be learned, and they are chiefly presented through the refined answers and instructions which Ayaz gives to his royal lover, end quote. All these narratives illustrate that love empowers Mahmud and Ayaz and enables them to cross earthly constructed paradigms and barriers of their own minds, leading to the annihilation of their nafs and the embrace of the other. In each narrative, Attar's depiction of the relationship, although encompassing some earthly elements, corresponds with the mystical longing of the Sufi to be united with the ultimate beloved. Attar shows that even though Mahmud and Ayaz's homoerotic relationship does not fit into the philosophy of Shahid Bazi, it can nevertheless be a doorway to the divine love. By writing a story of love between men, Attar supplies an instance of mutual desire instead of the one-sided objectified desire as in the philosophy. In addition, his rendering of a master-slave dominant subservient power dynamics as something fluid and his blurring of the lines with regard to the traditional passive-active partnerships seems to work as a critique of class and gender norms. Attar explores the unacceptable, the impossible, and the unimaginable, simultaneously allowing space for his readers to cross and imagine the unimaginable. He implies that the true love of God, as well as being a Sufi, is in itself transgressive. After all, it involves renouncing earthly normative relations such as marriage and procreation, very much the way a homoerotic relationship does. To Attar, love is a process of becoming oneself. The rhetoric of love for God's creation becomes one of the means of loving God rather than the elapsed phase to be foregone. Hence, he makes his point about Sufism, which aims at a more transcendental goal, that is, love of all creations of God as emanations of the divine.